So this is a quadratic situation. Anything that has x squared, or in this case, w squared, that's a quadratic. And the first thing you want to do for a quadratic is try to factor it. In other words, we'd be looking for two numbers that add to 12 and multiply to negative 40. And there are no two numbers that do that. When something doesn't factor, you want to either use the quadratic formula or the completing the square method. And to be successful on the SAT, you need to be good at both of these methods. So for the quadratic formula, you want to know it by heart because you're not being given that formula on the formula sheet. Negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And a quadratic is in the format of ax squared plus bx plus c. So your a is 1, your b is 12, and your c is negative 40. So let's follow that. Negative 12 plus and minus square root of 12 squared minus 4 times 1, which I'm not going to write because nothing happens when you multiply by 1, times negative 40, all over 2 times 1. Under the radical, we'll have 12 squared, which is 144. And then negative 4 times negative 40, that's plus 160. So we're getting 304 under the radical. Negative 12 plus or minus root 304 all over 2. Now, we can cheat a little bit off of the answer choices because they all have square root of 19. So we can divide 304 by 19, and we'll find out that it's really 16 times 19. So negative 12 plus or minus square root of 16 times 19 all over 2. And this 16 is a perfect square, so we can take the square root of that and leave the 19 underneath. So let's move this all over here. And this is going to give us negative 12 plus or minus 4 root 19 all over 2. In other words, the square root of 16 is 4, but there was no square root of 19. Now we can simplify everything by 2 because all three of these components are all divisible by 2. So negative 12 divisible by 2 divided by 2 is negative 6 plus or minus 2 root 19 all over 1. And that's going to be our answer, 2 root 19 minus 6, which is answer choice D. So that's using the quadratic formula to solve this. With this being the formula you need to memorize to do that. Now let's talk about doing this using completing the square. So the completing the square method is based on the b of the quadratic, which is right there. And you need to memorize b over 2, b over 2 squared. If b is 12, b over 2 is 6, and b over 2 squared is 36. So for the completing the square method, you want to get your x's all alone on one side. Here are w's. So we'll rewrite w squared plus 12w equals positive 40. In other words, we added 40 to both sides to get the x's, or the w's, all alone. Now in the b over 2 squared, b over 2 squared is what you add to both sides, and b over 2 is what it's going to factor to after you do that. So we are going to add 36 to both sides, and that'll give us 76 on this side. And w squared plus 12w plus 36, that factors to w plus 6 times w plus 6. So w plus 6 squared equals 76. And now, if we want to get w, we have to take the square root of both sides. So square root here, square root there. So we'll have plus or minus root 76 is equal to w plus 6. Take away 6 from both sides, and you'll have W is minus 6 plus or minus square root of 76. And how do we simplify the square root of 76 in radical form? Well, once again, we can cheat from the fact that all the answers have square root of 19 in them. And so what is 76 divided by 19? That's 4. So 76 is really 4 times 19. So negative 6 plus or minus root 4 times 19. And what's the square root of 4? Well, of course, it's 2, but the 19 stays underneath. So we have negative 6 plus or minus 2 root 19, and negative 6 plus 2 root 19 is one of those two answers. So for the completing the square method, you need to memorize b over 2 squared, and b over 2 is what it factors to. B over 2 squared is what you add to both sides. And there are some situations where you're forced to use the completing the square method. For instance, when you're finding the equation of a circle, that's a situation where you have to use this method or else there's nothing else to do. Here we had two choices. In any case, the answer here is D.